What's going on, guys? Welcome back. Today I want to talk about a report that Block Inc. put out. Block Inc. is a company that used to be Square. They own Cash App, but they put out a report called Bitcoin Knowledge and Perceptions. And it really has some interesting information about where Bitcoin is at in its adoption cycle, what people think about it, and the things that we need to do to continue pushing it forward. All right, so first off, let's talk about the methodology that they're using. So for this survey, they actually polled 9,500 people in 3 different regions across the world. I'm gonna save the key theme slide till the end just because I wanna go through the detailed charts first with you guys. But there's some interesting stuff here. So if we start with the reasons to buy Bitcoin by income group, what you see is that people that are in general higher earners are viewing Bitcoin more as an investment. But the reasons that they buy being primarily potential to make money, diversify my investment portfolio, protection against inflation. But then when you look at people with lower incomes, you can see that the reason that they're buying Bitcoin is more for the utility of it. It's an easy way to send money to others, especially if you're doing remittance payments or you're in a situation where you need to send money to a foreign country and you don't want to deal with Western Union and wires, and to purchase goods and services, which I think is really interesting. But I think the thing to take away from this is that if you're in that higher income group, you're more likely to be looking at Bitcoin as an investment, whereas if you're in the lower income group, you're really looking at the utility of Bitcoin to where it's solving an actual problem for you. I love that. Now, what I love about this next chart is it shows the difference in perspectives of how people view Bitcoin and what they want to use it for, depending on where people live. And this is something that I've talked about quite a bit with like my friends around the perspectives of Bitcoin in the US, because there's so many people I think who are critical of Bitcoin in the US, but their point of view is so skewed by our current way of life. But if you live somewhere like Nigeria or Argentina, where Bitcoin provides real utility based on the environment that you're having to deal with, it's a totally different story. And this chart really hammers it home. When you see the geography of people who think Bitcoin is a hedge against inflation or protection against inflation, it's in places where hyperinflation is really impacting them, like Argentina. So when some TradFi guys on Twitter talking trash about Bitcoin, like, I thought it was an inflation hedge, why is it down 50%? They're looking at it from a very narrow-minded US view. The world's bigger than the US, like it or not, and Bitcoin is global money. I thought this chart was really interesting, the idea of perceived exclusivity of Bitcoin and Bitcoin communities, I thought was a really interesting question to have. I mean, I think number one, the numbers don't really tell me a lot because it's basically half the people across the world think that the Bitcoin community excludes them and the other half don't, with a little bit of variability, right? But the only thing that I will say though is that in general, I don't know so much about, this chart in particular, but when you need Bitcoin and when you need to understand it because the environment around you warrants it, then you will. And when that time comes, it doesn't matter what the community is or what people are saying on Twitter. If you need it and it's a tool that can help you, you're going to use it. And I think that's kind of the point. When I see these high numbers in the US and I see like France and the UK, to me, I would argue that those are areas that are part of the most privileged areas of the world. And so it's probably harder for people in those countries to get a grasp on why Bitcoin might be important as a freedom tool. Either way though, I thought it was interesting to include a question about, perceived exclusivity of the Bitcoin community. It's pretty fascinating that that's even a question. And I think when you look at this chart on Bitcoin's outlook by country, it kind of hits that same idea home. When you see places like Nigeria and Argentina with a very high percentage of people that are optimistic about Bitcoin, it's because they can see the value more immediately than people, let's say, in the US or the UK can. I will say though, I'm pretty disappointed in the US number. I mean, seriously, only 29% of people are optimistic about Bitcoin in the US. Like, that's sad. That's just sad. It needs to be higher. Okay, so this particular chart was actually the most interesting one to me because it talks about the reasons why people don't want to buy Bitcoin. And these are things that I've heard from my friends or people that I know who aren't ready, because it really highlights and showcases how education is one of the biggest gaps to Bitcoin adoption right now. So number one, 51% of people don't know enough about it, and that's why I didn't buy it. That's huge. But the crazy part is, if you look at like the top 5 items, they're all related to education. Don't know enough about it. Cybersecurity theft risks. Don't know how to buy it. Too much price volatility. Too expensive. To me, those are all education type of issues. One, I don't know enough about it. Clearly, it's people don't feel comfortable because they don't really understand Bitcoin, so they don't want to put their money into it. Fair. Education straight up. But 32% said cybersecurity and theft risks. To me, that's an education issue because Bitcoin does add that additional element of personal accountability, right? Especially if you hold your own private keys, you want to take your Bitcoin off exchanges. I mean, these are concepts that people don't deal with their normal money. Understanding how to manage your Bitcoin, how to hold it safely, how to transact safely, all those things are education things to me. 27% said it's too expensive. Again, that's an education thing to me. Bitcoin itself, one Bitcoin may be more than you can afford, but you don't have to buy one Bitcoin. You can buy a fraction of a Bitcoin, right? To me, that's mostly an education thing. 22% don't know how to buy it. Clearly education. And 30%, too much price volatility. So this, even though it's kind of borderline, I still consider it an education item. Price volatility is not necessarily a bad thing. Prices can be volatile and go up a lot too, which Bitcoin has done in its history. But the point here is that understanding what Bitcoin is and what value it can have for you in your portfolio as a savings technology, those things need to be considered whenever you think about price volatility. Now, should you invest your emergency savings into Bitcoin? Probably not, right? Because there is quite a bit of market volatility right now with Bitcoin. And if that's money that you may need in the next year or however many months, you don't want to risk it to investing. But that's not specific to Bitcoin. That's in any investment. But understanding more about how Bitcoin fits into your overall portfolio or savings plan, and understanding that if you put money that you don't need necessarily for the next 12 months into it, there's definite value down the road. Again, to me, that's education. So these other things, no practical use for it. That could be education as well. Environmental impact is too high. That could be education as well. It's too much of a long-term investment. I don't know that I get that one. There's definitely items there that even with education, people just may not agree with, my point of view or another person's point of view about Bitcoin. It's clear that, in my opinion, the top 5 or most of the top 5 there are education based. The last chart that I want to show you guys is this awareness of cryptocurrencies chart. It's actually really interesting to me because I don't want to talk about Doge and Ripple and Cardano and all this nonsense, but the gap in awareness globally between Bitcoin and Ethereum as the second was a little shocking to me. I mean, Ethereum's been around for 8 years now or so. If you're into Bitcoin or if you're into crypto, and you're on social media, places like Twitter. I mean, these are things that you hear about all day, every day, and it just becomes ingrained kind of in our minds. But when you step out of that bubble and just people out there in the world who are living their life who may have heard of this stuff before but have no clue what it is, they're really at the very beginning of this. But Bitcoin being at least heard of or being aware of 88% of the respondents, that's huge. I mean, there's a huge opportunity to say, okay, you've heard of Bitcoin, now let's help you understand it. All right, so real quick, let's go over the key themes and finding slide, and I'll kind of tell y'all what I thought as well. So number one, people see promise in Bitcoin for a more equitable economy. I love the information about people who are in lower incomes that are finding utility in Bitcoin. I think that's amazing when you see how Bitcoin's being used in places where there's hyperinflation as a hedge, and in places where there's conflict or crisis and people have to be able to get out of a country with some money or some savings, and they're using Bitcoin to do so. To me, that really hits home the potential of what Bitcoin can be and how it's such an amazing tool to use in those crisis times when you absolutely need it. So number two, education is key. To me, this was really the huge takeaway and something that I'm really personally interested in. Even when you hear people's questions about Bitcoin when they don't understand it, you can tell just by their questions that they're at the very beginning of their understanding. And I think there's an opportunity there to make it easier for people to onboard. And a lot of the reason why I actually created this channel was because I wanted to do something a little bit different with Bitcoin related videos. And I know I talk about other money things and stocks and other stuff. The reality for me was that I had the advantage of having years to be able to study and understand Bitcoin. Plus, I had a background in computer science and I had a career in payments technology. So I was already kind of in this world where I could understand it at least a little bit when I was starting out. But when you have folks who are coming from a background where they're not technical and they don't have a financial background, they don't have an economics background, it's extremely hard to understand what the hell we are talking about. And so part of what I wanted to do on this channel is make it easier for folks to onboard onto Bitcoin without feeling overwhelmed. Because as you guys know, if you're dealing with something that's just confusing and it's frustrating you, you're more likely to just turn away and never deal with it again, as opposed to having to fight through it and really understand something that is just different than anything you've ever learned about before. That's all I have for you guys today. If you like this video, you want to watch more Bitcoin videos, click on the videos on the end screen. I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.